Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for calling in to our IPI virtual forum. It's just 8 o'clock, so we'll be getting started now. Our forum today is on Partnering Steering Committee Implementation, and Mark Leja with Hill International Consulting, Inc. will be presenting on this call, and I will be moderating. This is Donna Paz with International Partnering Institute, and we're very excited about today's call. So we'll go ahead and get started. First, we're going to start with some welcome and introductions. I'd like us to please go around the room and introduce yourself, who you are with, and what you are hoping to learn from the call today. So I will start with Donald Saunders. Could you please introduce yourself, and then we'll just go around the room.
Hi, Donald Saunders, Alberta Transportation. What I'm trying to learn here is we're just in the process of hopefully starting up a partnering steering committee with our partners in the Consulting Engineers of Alberta and the Alberta Road and Heavy Construction Association. So we're just getting going with this.
Great. Thank you very much for calling in. Somebody else please introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Larry.
Hi.
Larry Anderson, Anderson Partnering in the Detroit, Michigan area, and I'm interested because the Michigan DOT is thinking about starting an PFC.
Thank you very much, Larry.
This is Lamont Forgaze with Q&D Construction. We're currently in a partnering project at the San Luis Obispo Airport Terminal with the County of San Luis Obispo, and I'm just looking for ways to better our partnering process.
Thanks, Lamont. Welcome to the call.
Thanks.
This is Dwight Pullen with Skanska, and I'm on the Aviation Committee for IPI.
Thank you, Dwight. Welcome to the call.
Good morning. This is Tom Taylor with WebCore Builders. I'm part of the board at IPI and also was on the vertical committee, and we have 4 projects partnered at SFO right now.
Welcome to the call, Tom. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is Roddy Bogus. I'm also on the Board of Advisors for IPI. I'm with Suffolk Construction and just got off the phone with American Airlines about possibly doing an IPI project with them. So very timely, and anytime I get a chance to hear Mark speak is a good day.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Roddy. Thank you. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, this is Des Kernahan. I'm with Associated Engineering in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm one of the Consulting Engineer of Alberta representatives on the partnering committee that Donald Saunders mentioned earlier.
Great. Thanks, Des. Welcome to the call. Anyone else like to introduce
Good morning, Donna.
themselves?
Larry Eisenberg.
Hi, Larry. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Larry is our vertical committee chair. Welcome to the call, Larry. Anyone else like to introduce themselves before we get going?
Yeah, this is Dave Thorman.
Hi, David. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I did want to, in some logistical notes, this is an interactive presentation, so we welcome your questions throughout the presentation, and there will also be time for questions at the end. So we very much welcome your contributions, insights, inputs, and thoughts as we move forward. If you are not actually speaking into the phone, please mute the call. I believe you can mute it with *6 and unmute it again with *6, just so that we don't create any echo. We'll also be recording this call and have it up on our YouTube channel so you can share it with your colleagues who have missed it. And, of course, we'll go around after the presentation with some final thoughts. Our presenter today is Mark Leja. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Mark to you. He's an executive consultant with Hill International, Inc., and Mark specializes in helping agencies with their project delivery and their programs, advising on things like starting a steering committee, strategic planning, best practices, and operational improvements. Mark is also a founding member of IPI's Board of Advisors. He's one of the principal thought leaders here at IPI who's helped us really get going. And he spent over 30 years with Caltrans as Division Chief of Construction. He was very much engaged in establishing their statewide policies and their steering committee, which he chaired for the last part of his tenure there. So without further ado, Mark, please take it away. Thank you very much for presenting today.
Okay, thank you, Donna, and hello, everyone. Good to hear so many familiar voices. The topic for this morning is to talk a little bit about implementing a partnering steering committee. So I want to begin by saying that there are many ways to do this, and there's no perfect model out there, but there are a number of examples, and we're going to cover a few of those examples this morning to help illustrate the variety of ways that you can implement a partnering steering committee. If you do choose to form one, you probably need to customize it and tailor it to best fit your agency and also the construction industry that you're working with. That said, I have learned a few lessons along the way implementing a steering committee at Caltrans, and I'm anxious to share some of the lessons that we've learned from our successes and also from the mistakes that we made, which we did a few. So let me begin by a quick review of the topics we're going to discuss today. I want to review why a partnering steering committee is beneficial. I think this will help get us all on the same page of why are we doing this and what do we hope to get from the steering committee. We'll spend a few minutes talking about the important first steps that you should consider when you begin forming a steering committee. It's always important to get off to the right foot, and we have a few suggested first steps for you to take. We're going to talk about some examples that I'm familiar with, and I hope at this point, if others on the call have examples of partnering steering committees that they've either been on or are familiar with, and you'd like to share their how they're set up and some of the things they've been able to accomplish, there'll be an opportunity for you to do that, and we would really appreciate your input. And then finally, I want to go through a few of the common threats and pitfalls that we've experienced to a productive steering committee. These are some of the things that surprises that happen as your steering committee gets going, and I just want to alert you to them so that maybe you can help smooth them out if they do come your way. So those are the topics I'm going to cover. And I hope that this is very interactive. I'm going to stop many times and ask you if you have any questions. So please engage and share your thoughts. So with that, let me get started with the benefits. This again is a little bit of a review for those of you who are familiar with the steering committee, but in case you're not, one of the things that a steering committee brings is that it helps gather and energize partnering champions to lead a cultural change within your organization to help you have a more collaborative building experience. Most agencies have individuals that have worked on construction projects and done partnering, and they're familiar with some of the concepts. Contractors often have worked with different owners and they understand what partnering is. And these individuals are probably utilizing the approach on their projects or within their sphere of influence. But a partnering steering committee brings these potential leaders together and allows them to have a synergy amongst the sharing that they bring to the committee. And so it's a really powerful outcome by just gathering and energizing these skilled and talented people to help lead the change that's necessary to have a more collaborative building process. Another benefit that's very important for a steering committee is that it supports the development of partnering tools, training, and recognition. For those of you who are familiar with the key elements of a partnering program, partnering tools training and recognition are certainly fundamental to having an overarching, comprehensive partnering effort. Partnering tools that I'm referring to are things like having a field guide to partnering for your project teams to utilize, having a facilitator's expectations manual, so all the facilitators are somewhat consistent about how they are implementing their role. Training, having an orientation training and follow-up training on the partnering fundamentals is definitely a key element. And of course, a recognition program, all of these things that are coordinated and vetted through the Partnering Steering Committee. And so you've got a group of people that can help refine and fine-tune these tools so that they're consistent and optimized for the agency that you're working with. Also, a key element of having a steering committee formed is the identification of barriers to partnering out there on field projects. Not only identifying the barriers, but getting the momentum going to remove them. This is a fundamental expectation of a steering committee to be able to identify and to help overcome the barriers that are out there. You'll see this in many charters, and it's really a focus of every activity that a steering committee is working on, and that is what's in the way of the people doing their projects in a more collaborative way, and how can we as a steering committee get around them. And then finally, a benefit that sometimes gets overlooked is that having a steering committee ensures that your partnering efforts will continue over time. For some of you who have been doing partnering or familiar with it for many years, it can go in cycles with different agencies. You can have the period of high expectations and enthusiasm and support for the use of partnering, and then you can have the low points of skepticism and where people are not embracing the approach anymore. And these can go up and down through different changes in administration or just through time. And so having a steering committee in place can help smooth out those ups and downs. It can help with transition of leadership, or as champions move on or retire and do different things. It'll allow your partnering efforts to continue, and they don't become as reliable or relied on by just certain individuals. You have that steering committee that can be your continuity. So these are the main benefits that I've seen from having a steering committee. At this point, I'd just go ahead and stop and see if there's anyone else that would like to share a benefit that I haven't included here of the steering committee that or could see a potential benefit. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on then and talk about maybe what you were waiting to hear, and that is some of the important first steps. Let's assume then that you're strongly considering or you're about to form a partnering steering committee and you'd like to get it started in the right direction. One of the first things that you need to do is identify who your committee sponsor or sponsors are going to be. You need to identify the support staff and the partnering facilitator or expert that you're going to be using. This is your core team of people that are going to help get you organized and get you going in the right direction. Having a committee sponsor is typically from within the agency, but a real desirable approach with such with a committee, a collaborative committee, is to have a co-sponsor, and a co-sponsor potentially from industry, ideally from an association like the Associated General Contractors or some other contractor association that is very active in your agency's building process, and they could be the co-leader of this steering committee. There's a lot more upside to having a co-sponsor with a group like this than having just an individual. And so if you have the right people, strongly consider having a co-sponsor. Support staff. Sponsors of committees often don't do very good at preparing agendas or scheduling meetings or sending out invitations. That you need support staff that are people that can work with the facilitator to make sure that the meetings are prepared for and things go well. So are there any questions about how you identify a sponsor for your partnering steering committee?
I actually have a question, Mark. What are some of the characteristics that you ideally look for in the main sponsor?
Well, from my own experience, it was very important that the sponsor of our partnering steering committee had control of policy on the delivery of construction projects. The individual at Caltrans was our chief engineer, and this individual was responsible for all project delivery within our agency, the design, the right-of-way, environmental, and of course construction. And so as the steering committee identified barriers that needed to be removed, sometimes they weren't just in construction. Sometimes they were design issues or utilities or other barriers that were causing trouble for a collaborative approach. And so you need someone at the level that's high enough to help facilitate that. So I think having a chief engineer or someone who's responsible for all project delivery within the agency is key. And then on the industry side, it's probably desirable not to have someone necessarily from an individual contractor, but someone from an association. That might help with some of the perceptions that might come from that. It's not fatal to have an individual from an individual contractor, but it's probably better if you can identify an association or representative, the executive director or something from your contractors associations would probably be more appropriate. Okay, any other questions? Let me move on then. Setting up your committee, obviously you got to identify the members and secure their commitment. This is going to require some outreach and some phone calls. And at this point, when you've got your sponsors and your support staff and your facilitator on board, it's probably prudent to develop a draft charter. If you're familiar with a charter for a committee, this isn't a master's thesis or anything. This is just a brief document that helps you document in writing your expectations for the committee. An excellent example, IPI has a document called Working Together. Hopefully that popped up on your screen. Mm-hmm. It's called How to Start a Steering Committee. If you're not familiar with this, it's a great reference document. Included in this is a sample of a charter, and the elements of the charter are probably familiar to you. You establish a purpose of the committee, committee authority, the governance that would be used, whether this is an advisory group or how often you will meet, things like that. In addition, you'll be establishing your initial goals and objectives, and you'll be putting them down in writing, and you'll be listing all of the membership that will be included in your committee. So these are the key elements of a charter. I encourage you to develop a draft one at this point, and that helps put down in writing what your committee's expectations are. So now, after you've got your charter in place, you've got to start with the planning of your kickoff meeting, and you really do need to think through that and prepare for the kickoff. You're going to gather a lot of individuals that are pretty high-powered and excited about helping with partnering, and you want to make sure that meeting goes well. There's also an excellent example of an agenda for your kickoff session, and I would encourage you to review this. It's also in the Working Together document. It suggests a 2-day endeavor first day or evening is a social time to get together and to get to know each other a little bit better, have dinner, and share a little bit about why you're a partnering supporter. And then on day 2, you do quite a bit of work involved. You want to make sure that your sponsors are there, that they have opening remarks that are encouraging and supportive of going forward with your steering committee. And then you get into topics like identifying barriers and trying to get to the point where you can determine some subcommittees to work on those barriers. And if you're able to accomplish all that in the first day, you've done a very important activity. You've identified some barriers to work on, and you've finalized your charter. And that's why you develop the draft charter ahead of time, and that's so that you can go through it and refine it and develop it in more detail and make it acceptable to all the members that are there. So your outcomes from your kickoff session are the identification of barriers, the formation of subcommittees, and also the preparation and execution of a charter for you to work on. So those are some of the key elements of getting started. And then finally, after you've had this kickoff session, I would advise be prepared to take action. You've energized a pretty powerful group of people. They want to see change. They want to see action taken, and you're going to have some work to do to follow up on the actions and get the committees rolling and the barriers being worked on. So be prepared to take action afterwards. You don't want to let down this group and get all the enthusiasm charged up and then not follow up with it. Mm-hmm. So let me stop there and ask if there's any questions that you might have or anything I can elaborate on with these important first steps of getting a steering committee formed and kicked off.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm curious just if you can give me any insights on the work that you do to get buy-in to get to the point where you're having a steering committee. Any tips on that?
Yeah, getting agreement to form a steering committee is also a nuance there that some agencies get to very quickly. You'll have a leader that's familiar with some of the outcomes from partnering, and they'll say, let's make this happen. And I'll touch on this a little later, but at the city of San Francisco, the mayor said, we're going to do this. And he turned to his agency heads and said, you're going to implement partnering. And they were charged with go figure it out. So when it comes from the very top, the direction is clear and the support is there. When you're in the middle and you're trying to push up the need to make change, it's harder. And I think you could use some assistance. And that assistance can often come from your contractor and your industry partners. Many contractors have had experience with partnering, and they also have a voice with your leadership within your agency. They're connected through various groups that they're on. Sometimes they can just pick up the phone and talk to them. But your industry can be a big help in encouraging an agency leadership to take on the effort of forming a committee and developing the practice of being more collaborative. So I would encourage you, and I don't know where you are in your organization, but if you have industry advocates who work with the agency that you want to have do more partnering, the industry can be a big help in getting things started.
Great. Thank you so much.
You bet. Okay, well, let's move on then. And if we don't have any other questions on just getting started, the next point Examples of partnering steering committees. The one that I'm most familiar with is Caltrans. This is California Department of Transportation. I led the steering committee for 7 years, and it was a very well-functioning group. They're coming up on they've just passed their 10-year anniversary of being formed, and they've been able to accomplish many things. They have a balanced membership with industry. Just quickly, they have about 15 members from within Caltrans, senior management, regional or district construction managers, and corporate managers as well. And then they've got about 15 industry representatives, some from contractors, some from small business, some subcontractors, and also industry associations, AGC, and a couple others that are here in California. So the membership, I think, is very well balanced, and the size of the group of about 30 is manageable. In addition, they put most of their focus and energy into barrier removal, and so they have subcommittees which they update each year, and those subcommittees focus on the barriers that are in the way of field staff accomplishing their work. Caltrans has more than 600 active construction projects around the state, and so there's a lot of project teams, and they identify things that are in their way of having a collaborative building, and they pass that on and up their management chains, and it gets to the steering committee, and that's how they learn about the barriers that need to be worked on. So that's Caltrans. Any questions about the Caltrans steering committee? Sorry to rush through that, but that's one that I'm most familiar with, and I wanted to get to some of the others as well, and show you the diversity of committees out there. The City of San Francisco, as I mentioned before, the mayor of San Francisco said we're going to do partnering on our public works projects, and so they formed the steering committee just recently to do that. They have 6 different agency departments that are involved in their steering committee, and they have challenged themselves with a very inclusive membership, and it's probably a little too large, in my opinion. Probably it's over 40 people, and it might even be higher. They included a lot of their stakeholders, a lot of their contractor associations, and including ASCE, the Associated American Society of Civil Engineers here in the San Francisco area. So, I mean, they've really gone out of their way to try to be inclusive in all of their folks that are on the steering committee. And it's really going to put a burden, I think, or a challenge on the team, and particularly the facilitator. But it is, one approach, and that is all on board, and let's move ahead with identifying barriers on public works projects within the city. And let me give you a little example of how diverse the agencies are. You have the airport, which is one department, San Francisco International Airport, and then you've got public works, you've got a transit agency, you've got a public utilities department, and they got a port of San Francisco, and they all do public works projects, and they all have to follow similar rules, and so they all want to do, and they all have the same mayor, and they all want to implement partnering on their projects. And so it's quite a diverse group, and the results are still yet to come out. They've got subcommittees that they've formed, and hopefully it'll be something that benefits them with some early successes. Any questions about San Francisco? Okay, let me jump to another Department of Transportation. This is Ohio's DOT. They've also had a steering committee in place for a number of years, but they've had very focused responsibilities. They've been primarily working on just their recognition program. They have an awards event and an awards process that they go through, and the steering committee identifies the criteria for their awards, and then does the evaluation of the award winners. And then they have a once-a-year multi-day event called the Conaway Conference, and that event is often planned and executed through the Partnering Steering Committee. And it brings industry and all of the agency staff involved in building projects together. They share information, and they talk about the collaborative experiences that they're having. So that's what Ohio DOT is currently doing with their Partnering Committee. And at this point, I'd like to see if there's any other examples of Partnering Steering Committees that you're familiar with. Larry Anderson, I did hear you say that Michigan is considering one. I don't know if they've had one in the past, but are they considering doing one that you're familiar with?
Say in Michigan, what we're struggling with is the same thing that you described at the beginning as the need for continuity and the benefit that a steering committee would bring. Because it seems like there's sort of just like the tide rolls in and rolls out. There's a push and then there's not a push. And there's a push and there's not a push as people change and as the emphasis from industry changes. But I think you've already given me some great ideas and some great hints to share with people at the working level who are charged with this in Michigan, and I hope this will help us get going with it. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you for your input. Any other examples that folks are aware of, that people who might be considering doing the steering committee or have tried one and it didn't work?
I have a question.
Okay.
As far as the leader of the steering committee, is it sometimes like kind of like a partnering session, a third party that kind of organizes and facilitates it, or is it typically come from the owner or the industry, or where does the organizer who sets it up and runs the meetings, and does it just depend on the situation?
Well, it can depend, but there are some best practices. The best practice is to hire a neutral third party, someone who has experience facilitating large groups of diverse backgrounds. And so you want a professional in the room that can handle the crowd and can help move forward a group of people working on, sometimes difficult topics. And so the ideal arrangement is to have co-sponsors, one from industry and one from the agency, and then a neutral third-party facilitator who's actually running the meeting and keeping things going. Now, the skills of a facilitator can be quite varied, and they need to match up with the expectations of the sponsors. But I really think having a neutral third party will be the safest approach for most steering committees. Hopefully they'll have experience with actually partnering on projects, and they'll be able to not only be a meeting facilitator, but an on-site expert when questions come up about, well, what's a dispute resolution ladder and how's it used, and what about monthly surveys? And so that's part of the benefit of having a neutral available.
Donald, do you mind sharing where you are in Alberta's formation of a steering committee? Are you still in the planning stages, or are you close to kicking off?
I would say we're still in the planning stages. Where we're at is we're working with industry to try to set up kind of an overall charter. It might not be called a charter in the end of the day, but something like that. And I have drafted terms of reference for a potential partnering committee, but it's very, very draft. In fact, I wish I'd waited until I had this meeting. I probably would have done a couple things differently in the draft terms of reference, but it's still draft, so it can be changed. and so we're probably, I've probably skipped a couple steps of recommended things like I don't know if we have asked for support for people from industry, but I don't know if we have a strong list of like champions or whatever from industry yet.
Mark, do you have any tips on how to engage a potential co-sponsor? How to get them as jazzed as you might be about sponsoring the committee?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes agencies have regular meetings with their industry partners. This doesn't have anything to do necessarily with partnering. It's just they get together periodically or regularly to review news and changes within the agency and try to predict, where that the program is headed. And so they have liaison committees, or an agency will have a regular, maybe it's just annually. They'll meet annually with representatives of the associations and the contractors. It's at those forums that the discussion of partnering on projects should be brought up and try to energize some support. You want the already established liaison groups to be involved in the formation of your steering committee, and ideally to have representatives that are already meeting with the agency be on the steering committee. And you don't necessarily want, a separate group off doing their own thing if you've already got established practices of interacting with industry. Here in California, the construction industry was very engaged with the Department of Transportation. They had our director's phone number on speed dial, and so there was no problem with an interaction between the construction industry and our leadership. And so that connection was made, and the support of getting someone from industry involved was pretty easy. And I don't know how to energize it in the area that you're at, but I do think that there's got to be some reaching out to the industry associations first. In the United States, it's usually the Associated General Contractors. They have national organizations, they have regional groups, they have state groups. So that's AGC is national, and you've got lots of local associations that contractors are part of. Go to their meetings, get them involved, and they will help you, I think, identify the right people and the right way to get industry supporting you in making the change. I said this earlier, but industry really drives the accountability for the agency. For at least that's my experience, is that contractors are the ones who are going to say, what about that partnering effort? How's that going? I heard you're implementing this change. What's the status of that? And to me, that accountability from the construction industry was really key to keeping the momentum going on different agency managers who would just as soon not be bothered. And so having some support from industry can be really helpful.
Yeah, just Donald Saunders again. In Alberta, we do have we call it a strategic priorities group that it meets at a high level, and there's an operating committee that is a subcommittee of that kind of is a link between the Alberta Transportation and the contractors and consultants in Alberta. And we have reached out to those guys. That's where we're at right now, is to try to get membership for a more focused partnering steering committee.
Right. Yeah. Ideally, if you could have it be a subcommittee of that larger group, or at least a task team that reports back to the larger group.
And I think that's kind of our plan, I think.
Yeah. That way you're intertwining it in your already established working practices.
Yep.
Okay. Any other examples, questions? So let's move on and talk about some of the common threats or pitfalls that you could experience with your committee. you've done all the right things, you think you've picked all the right members, and then you realize after a few meetings that maybe maybe you don't have the right people, or you'll look around and you say, well, where's so-and-so? How come they're not here? How come they're not part of this? And that's to be expected. You will miss a few of the right people. Here's a suggestion. I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but from the agency side, you need two groups of people on your committee. You need not only the policy owners. This is often your headquarters or your corporate leaders, the people who own the policy and can change the policy. But you also need your local construction managers, your local project delivery managers, the people who are actually implementing the projects. Because if you don't have the local and regional managers there, then this endeavor will be perceived as a policy change from the ivory tower, and it won't necessarily be embraced. And so you need a good mix of the regional or the district management, and I call them local leaders. But these are the people that the field staff turn to for guidance when they have a question about implementing partnering on their project. They turn locally for guidance and direction. They don't necessarily look to headquarters for that. So having both on your team will help ensure that you've got a good mix. Don't crowd your committee with just policy headquarters type people. Make sure you got the working managers, also operation type managers involved. On the industry side, you need industry representatives with both internal and external influence. And what I meant by this was you need it high enough level within your construction companies to have internal influence within their companies, so that when a company decides they want to implement partnering along with this agency, that they have the horsepower to make that happen. But you also want individuals on your steering committee from industry that have external influence and that they're engaging in different associations. They're also influential with their subcontractors, their suppliers, and with other contractors. So you want movers and shakers within the industry on your steering committee, and that usually means either presidents, senior VPs, or operations managers. These are the folks with the horsepower to make change, and those are the right kind of people. And you want them to be, of course, advocates for collaboration, but they also have to have the ability to implement the change. Another important part, you've got your committee going, and now you've got key members, but they're not coming. They're not showing up, and that can really be a problem because other people are dedicating the time to work on your committee, and how do you get them to attend? The secret that I found was peer pressure. And so we actually, in some cases, we had a couple of contractors who we really wanted to be part of it, and so we had a few of their peers call them or email them ahead of time to remind them about the upcoming steering committee, and that they had some action items that they were asked to work on, and so we had some peer support for the attendance. And in most cases, it helped. There was friendly and appropriate ribbing for those who came to the meetings but didn't necessarily stay for the whole time or were distracted by their telephones. And so there was an attempt by the group to try to maintain that engagement through all of the sessions. So poor attendance can really sabotage your committee if you're not careful, and there's some strategies that you can use to try to encourage that. Oftentimes it does require advanced special care and handling to make sure that the key members are coming and that they're ready. Any questions about getting key members in the room? Okay, let me move on then. Another common pitfall would be you have turnover of your members. Some turnover is to be expected, but you want to try to keep that to a minimum. You don't want it to all happen at once. If you've got a working group of 30 people, it was not unusual for us to have 2 or 3 people in the room that this was their first meeting or their second meeting. And so, but the majority of the people that were engaged had been for some time. And this keeps you from rehashing the same old issues that you dealt with last year. And so try to keep your turnover to a minimum. I know you can't always control when people retire or change jobs, but it's very desirable and expected to have some turnover, but try to keep it to a minimum if you can. The other thing that happens with your committee is you got some high-level people that expect change, and you got to be careful not to have boredom creep in, where you're just not implementing change fast enough. That's what prompted my suggestion earlier to say, be prepared after your kickoff to go to work, because these people will have an expectation that change will be coming, and so you got to be careful not to bore those folks and say, well, nothing's happening, there's no changes going on, this isn't working. The opposite can also be an issue, and that is you try to do too much. After your first meeting, you brainstorm 30 different things to work on, and you set up 10 different subcommittees, and before you know it, everyone's going, whoa, too much. I have a day job. I can't do all this at once. And so watch out for burnout. And so the magic elixir is somewhere in between. You got to check the pulse of your steering committee and try to keep the individuals who want change to happen fast, keep them engaged and excited about what you have been doing, keep them busy, but try not to burn out the individuals who are dedicating some of their time to help with this change. And it's a balance. There's not a magic formula. It's just make sure that your group is moving at the pace that they're comfortable with, and somewhere in between boredom and burnout. Mm-hmm. So let me stop at that point and ask if any of you have any additional pitfalls or questions about any of the common threats that I've brought up here.
Hey, Mark, this is Roddy. Is there a formula for how big is too big? To keep everybody engaged. I find you run the risk of burnout if your group is too big and you get down in the weeds and you lose interest in some people. So is there a magic number in there on how many people to actually get invested in any one particular meeting?
Yeah, the size of the steering committee that I was familiar with was somewhere between 25 and 30 people. That allowed you enough to have 3 or 4 different subcommittees going in any given year and working on topics. And you could break it up into 4 or 5 people, and there's enough there that people could all engage, but it wouldn't put too much burden on any one person. And so that size of a room and that gives you enough to have working subcommittees where someone might not be in attendance that meeting, but the progress can still occur. If your group is too small, then you're not really going to be able to have functioning subcommittees. You won't be able to break out. They'll just be the same old 2 people you're looking at, and it's not going to allow you to really get the synergy of new ideas. So I think the number of the size of the overall committee is somewhere in that 25 to 30 range. And your number of issues or barriers to work on should probably be in the not more than 4 or 5. Be realistic about how much change you can implement in any given time, and be very cognizant of that these people that are gathering have another job. They have a day job that is very demanding, and you want to be respectful of that commitment that they've made to your team and not try to take advantage of it.
All right, thank you very much.
Hey, Mark, this is Larry. I've got a question related to your last response, and that is, yes, these people do have day jobs, these members, including the chair or the co-chairs of the committee. And my question is, in the organizations, the PSCs that you've seen, where does the actual staff work happen? The preparing of agendas and the calling of people and reminding them and doing meeting minutes and all that. How are you getting that done? Are the co-chairs doing that personally, or do they have staff? And is it typically happening on the owner side, or is our owner and industry sharing that staff work duty?
My experience was the owner took most of the staff activity for the invitations, the arrangements. The co-sponsors or the sponsors rarely made follow-up phone calls, but sometimes needed to when individuals were not attending. But most of the behind-the-scenes work was done by in combination with the agency staff and the facilitator. And I saw a very good collaboration between those two. An individual who will work with the facilitator to prepare a draft agenda, to bounce it off the sponsors, to make sure that all of the attachments that needed to went out with the invitation. So I saw a good success with an agency staff person and a facilitator to do the work.
Okay, thank you.
Another reason to have a neutral facilitator is they can also really do some of this staff work if your agency doesn't have the person to do that.
And do you pay the facilitator for that?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, it's they're not a volunteer group. I mean, they're trying to make a living as well, and you pay them for their work at the meetings, and it's fair to pay them for their preparation and their follow-up that happens before and after meetings.
Great, thanks.
You betcha. Okay, any other questions about pitfalls? With that, if there are any other remaining questions, I'd be happy to try to answer that.
Can you give me an idea of what kinds of things your subcommittees focused on?
Absolutely. Again, the theme that we start with each year was to try and identify barriers that the field teams are struggling with in the area of partnering. And so one year we had issues with the project schedules, and there was delays in getting the baseline schedules approved, or the specs required a very technical schedule, CPM schedule to be prepared. And so the debate and the disputes over the project schedule became a barrier for collaboration. Seems like they were always arguing about the schedule. And whose schedule was it? Who can change it? How is it changed? When is it changed? And so one of the subcommittees, both industry and agency representatives, wrestled with the practice, the best practices of submitting schedules, reviewing them together, which was one of the outcomes, and also a revisit of the project specifications. So one subcommittee worked on an area that was very painful for a number of teams. We revised the specifications. We sent out new best practices for folks to work on, and we felt that it was well received by industry and also by the agency staff. So that's an example of a subcommittee. Another one that was worked on recently was with our dispute resolution boards that we use and some of the outcomes from that. So we had a subcommittee working on DRBs and some of the practices that we have that utilize dispute resolution boards. So that's another one. We had a stormwater permit issue that changed here in California. It generated a lot of conflict on projects as far as who is responsible for managing stormwater. And so we worked on a subcommittee to try to smooth that out. So those are a couple quick examples. And most importantly, every year the steering committee should revisit the topics that they want take on, and then prioritize which ones that will give them the greatest return on the investment of their time.
Thank you. And you probably already covered this somewhere, but remind me, how often did your steering team meet?
I actually didn't mention it, but the best practice that I've heard is quarterly. The group would meet quarterly. I think after you have your kickoff session, you might want to have a little bit more quicker meeting just to keep the momentum going. But once you normalize, meeting quarterly is long enough in between meetings to where you can get some work done, but also you can not lose the familiarity with the issues. So quarterly seemed to be the right frequency of meeting.
Does anybody else have any questions for Mark? Well, thank you very much, Mark, for your excellent presentation, very informative, and we will have this on YouTube and send out the notes, of course, to all those who called in. Thank you all very much for your contributions and questions as well. I wanted to share with you before we end the call that we have many resources like the one that Mark mentioned today working together. They are on our website. And if you are a member of IPI, you do get those at a discounted, highly discounted rate. So please check into our website as often as you can and check back with us. We would like to continue this virtual forum series so that we can provide more best practices and guides for all of you out there who are wanting to partner your projects or start partnering programs. We have research, development, education, guidance, networking, and training opportunities here at IPI. So thank you for staying engaged. And please send us your comments on what stands out to you in response to our email with notes that is going to be going out very shortly. Does anybody have any closing comments before we end the call? No. Mark, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. This was very, very helpful and very informative.
You're very welcome. And can I just say that there's lots of benefits of having a steering committee. You're likely to have to customize it to fit your culture, but having a steering committee will help you with making that change go easier. So those are some of the kind of concluding comments that I wanted to share. And thank you for the opportunity to do this today.
This was excellent, Mark. Thank you very much.
This is Dave. Thank you, Mark. Great presentation.
Yeah, Mark, Larry, excellent job. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.